And I know that you're horrible, but I know what kind of God I serve.
What's up, my beloved Tabernacle Baptist Church family? I hope and pray that this Thanksgiving week was good. I hope you stayed safe, and I really hope that you did the things that was necessary in order to protect you and your loved ones. Also, I hope and pray you enjoyed our Cooking with PG this past week. It was great to fellowship with you, even if it's virtual. I love you guys, and I pray once again that as we get through this, as we move into the heart of the winter, that we do what is necessary in order for all of us to maintain our sanity, but also our safety. Listen, today's word is important. We get ready for worship tomorrow. I want to see you at Tab Global 9, 11, and 5 o'clock. But last week we had a word that was entitled, Get Some Time Away. Yes, in this moment of mental break, it is important that you and I find moments to just steal away. That's what Jesus did. In the midst of everything that was going on, he got away. Listen, I believe this word was challenging, but also encouraging. And I hope and pray that once again, as we get ourselves ready for worship on tomorrow, we can rewind and get the word from last week. God bless you. See you tomorrow. When Jesus heard the news about John, he left there in a boat and went to a lonely place by himself. Once again, I want to talk from that thought. Get some time away. Lord, speak. Your people need to hear. As we're thinking through this, with so much that's going on, let's be honest, it just seems as if we are bombarded with issues, concerns, crises, and yes, even storms. Those storms and notions of crisis is just part of life, and even though we know that, it still does not make it easier to comprehend. I mean, it is true. Either you're in a crisis, you're going to a crisis, or you're getting out of a crisis. And that statement kind of speaks to the reality that it is inevitable that we will endure things, that trouble will come, pain and problems will persist. And that just seems to be par for life. But this year, 2020, has exasperated it. It's elongated this year. It has made many of us just feel like things are spiraling out of control, not only from a global pandemic, racial unrest, and now even the latest of political uncertainty, as we're trying to figure out, can we just go ahead and turn the chapter on this year? I don't know about you. I can't wait to New Year's to get into another year, but the truth of the matter is, if it would be honest, we're not even sure how much change is going to happen at the beginning of next year. With that being said, as we begin to define what our crises are, we began to see them under a couple of banners. Either they're accidental or situational, stuff that just happens, that comes in our lives that are unexpected. It's almost like with Job, who had to deal with the loss of family and fortune, and even the stretching of his own faith. But also you have what's called developmental crises, things that come just through the process of life, whether you got married or perhaps went off to school. Many of us had to transition during this season. Life has continued on even in the midst of a global pandemic. But then there's also existential crises that go along with accidental and developmental crises. These are things that are systemic in nature, just par for the course, whether it's racism or sexism or classism. These issues that seem to be pounding on our lives every single day. And our responses to these crises, no matter who we are, no matter how saved we are, is the truth is that a lot of us oftentimes are feeling overwhelmed. We're stressed. We're anxious. I can't tell you how often my inbox is filled. Our congregational care team is having to deal with people who are just tired. I mean, they are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And one of the challenges with that is when we get stressed or have being too anxious, that can take us down some dangerous paths. I'm praying because I do believe that there's going to be a rise of addictions based on what we face this year. We're going to have challenges of also trying to deal with the stress in an unhealthy way. And if the truth be told, we're just at the point we want to tell God, stop the world and let us get on. And it is true, with all that going on, the pain, the main need and pressure that we're facing is that we really want to fix these problems. We really want to make sure that these circumstances are alleviated. And it is true, you can't fix it unless you face it. But I want to challenge us today, because I really want us to think through this today, because the thing I really want to put on our mind to contemplate is, does everything have to be fixed right now? In essence, there's that tension, because if you're like me, I get problems, I want to give a solution. But what I'm arguing today, unlike last week where Jesus got some sleep, is that I'm trying to argue today is that every moment requires a solution. Maybe this moment requires space. That I really want us to really think and consider this idea today, that the end of all that we're going through, maybe this is not a moment to try to seize the moment. Maybe this is the moment to get some space from the situation. Thomas Merton, one of my favorite devotional writers, talks about how many of us struggle with the contemplative life. And if we really think about it, many of our times we struggle just sitting still. Many times we struggle in solitude, and yes, we even struggle getting away. That's why this text of Matthew chapter 14 is very profound. It's not something new to the life of Jesus, but it highlights what I believe most oftentimes we do not talk about. Because the text says that the word has came to Jesus, and the word is that John the Baptist is dead. Notice how Jesus responds. The text says very clearly and succinctly in this portion of a verse, it simply says, and after hearing that word, Jesus gets away to a lonely place all by himself. In this moment, with everything that's going on, he's a son of God, and this is what Jesus chooses to do to get away. I really wanted to lift this up as God gave me guidance and he gave me permission to proceed with this series, is that it began for me to really begin to re-examine the life of Jesus, because I know oftentimes we focus on his birth, especially during this Christmas season. We talk about his miracles, his 7 I am statements. We talk about his death on the cross, but one of the most underheralded parts of his ministry perhaps was one of his most impactful, that whenever we talk about the ministry of Jesus, Jesus spent a lot of time in silence and in solitude. It's almost as if Jesus understood that it was just as important to do miracles and turn fish and bread into a meal or a banquet, just as it was for him to sit still in places of silence, and yes, even to get away. Matter of fact, when we begin to study the trajectory of Jesus, we note that this was his common thing that he would do whenever he had a tough decision to make, or whenever he was having to deal with some things or make a prayerful decision, or yes, even to focus on prayer. Jesus would go into moments of solitude and of being in silence. And I raise that for us because in where Jesus is primarily located, it was hard to get away. The reason I say that is when you study how his ministry is constructed, he literally was in an area called Galilee. Galilee is a strange country. It was about 50 miles from north to south, 25 from east to west. It was densely populated. In that small area of land, there was about 204 towns, and they at least had 15,000 persons per town. In other words, some scholars have suggested that this place was overcrowded. So you can imagine it became difficult for the Son of God, who was growing in notoriety, to find a place to get away. But our text reminds us that Jesus understood that even though I could not get away in Galilee, he could travel across the other side of a lake. The left side or the east side of the lake was about 8 miles away. It was a less populated place. And whenever you study the places where Jesus would go, this would be a major place where Jesus would find refuge. That he knew that Galilee was too crowded. Galilee, he was too known. But thanks be to God, he had a east side of a lake. And I want to offer that for you today, because I think that this moment that Jesus decides to go there, this place of refuge and rest, this place of solitude and silence, is significant because life is like Galilee. It is overcrowded. It is packed. It has got so much going on. All of us need a place we can get away from it all. I don't know where you are. I'm not sure exactly how your life is constructed. But I will admit to you that one of the things that I think will do us so good is if you and I would try to find out what is our east side of the lake. What is the place we can go and be in silence? Where can we go and be in solitude? Because I don't care how important you are in Galilee, you're going to break unless you find some time to get away. And that's what the passage allows us to unpack. That's what we see in this portion with Jesus. I mean, this man who takes silence and solitude seriously before decisions, before he's trying to get into prayer, but even dealing with grief. He teaches you and I the importance of being mature enough to know when is enough and know when we have to step away from some stuff and create space instead of providing a solution. Can I help you? I want you to know that solitude can be some of the best self-care. And here's the truth. If you don't prioritize it, no one else will. And just like I challenge you to get some sleep, today I'm challenging you to get some space. Today I'm hoping in the midst of everything going on, job, family, even your spiritual responsibility, get some time to get away. I know that you got so much on your agenda. I know your calendar is teeming with appointments, but you're going to break unless you get some time away. And that's what our text seems to lift up. And I want to talk about this notion of solitude from this perspective. This actually is the 5th time in the Gospel of Matthew that Jesus gets away. He would get away to pray. He would get away to get his thoughts together. But this time was unique and different, because he was responding to an overwhelming moment, and we see him taking time to get away. What is it? I want you to really jot these down. Can we walk this together? Just a few thoughts that I really want us to ponder. As I was practicing and preparing and praying over this message, God was speaking even into my own life. And I really hope that you'll walk this journey with all of us together, that it's just not sleep that God requires, but he also requires some space. So the first thing that I noticed in our text about why I think Jesus makes the decision in this moment to get away is because he shows you and I the reality is that we must get away in order to grapple with the reality of the pain. Here's the truth. Let me give you this news flash. Jesus had pain. And this text highlights it. Because in other often times that you see him get away is for prayer, got to make an important decision. But this time he gets away as a response to a situation that's the death of John. John, my brothers and sisters, if you read Matthew chapter 14, it highlights in the first few verses of this chapter, John's ending. You know John, that forerunner, John, who is supposed to be the messenger that's proclaiming the Messiah. This John, this rabble-rouser, this rabbi in the wilderness, this John has now met his end. John had been incarcerated until now. King Herod, because of the pressure of his own wife, had decided to take the life of John. And in our text, the text tells us that John gets beheaded. He gets beheaded, and now John is dead. And this word comes to Jesus. I want you to understand that for Jesus, this was a lot. Because not only was he the forerunner, I mean, he was in the shoes of Elijah, but there was also a familial connection. Because John literally was his cousin. You remember that when Jesus' mom Mary was pregnant, one of the first individuals she's told was her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth, by the time Mary goes to speak to her, is pregnant with the baby John. They met even in the womb, and all throughout their lives, not only did they have this spiritual connection, but they also had a familial connection. So when Jesus hears that John is dead, it's not just a spiritual friend, it's also a family member. Now, in this moment, Jesus has some grief. And I want us to understand why this to me was so profound, why this was powerful, is because oftentimes we do not want to focus in on the humanity of Jesus. But Jesus in our text teaches us that you can be spiritual, you can love God, you can have faith and still have some hurt. That's one of the challenges I believe that's being pronounced as we think through this whole notion of being kingdom ambassadors. I see so many people who claim to love the Lord. They try their best and focus. They read scripture. They sing songs. I've seen some of the best, but oftentimes we can be so spiritual that we fail to appreciate the fact that we too have pain and we have hurt. And at the end of the day, hear me clearly, is that I want you to understand none of us are too spiritual to be exempt from hurt. Hurt comes. Grief comes. Unexpected pain comes. And Jesus knows what it is to deal with pain. Matter of fact, this wasn't the first time he had to wrestle with grief. If you remember, he got a call that his friend Lazarus had died. And he decided to wait around a little while, and by the time he got there, Martha and Mary were distraught. Matter of fact, on the way to the tomb, Mary comes to Jesus and she falls at his feet. You can imagine the disappointment that she's dealing with. Her brother is dead, and she thought that they were close enough to Jesus. Jesus could have did something with her, but notice what Jesus does in this moment. Jesus wept. We see the hurt of Jesus all throughout Scripture. And I appreciate this moment because it lets us know that there is a proper way to deal with the grief. Sometimes it's okay to get away. Sometimes it's all right to grapple with the reality of the pain. As I was reading this particular passage and I was thinking through this narrative, it made me think about one of the moments of my life that I will admit I mismanaged. Now, I'm not one who has many regrets, and I've had some good moments and bad moments. I made good decisions and bad decisions, but there is one moment I wish I could have back. That moment happened in 2008. It was early on a Tuesday morning in February. My phone rang. I had just landed in Phoenix, Arizona for a pastoral conference. And my friend, my cousin, called to offer condolences. He's the one that told me my grandfather, Ernest Swan, had died. This was the first call I had received. I had talked to my grandfather that Saturday before. I knew that he was getting ready to come to the end, but I had not known. Can you imagine getting a call like that as you just landed at a conference? This was the man that raised me since 14 months of age. This is the man that I looked up to. This is the man that was larger than life to me. This was the man that I put my life after and wanted to pattern myself after. He's the man that I trudged in his shadows. That's the man that I would put on his shoes just to try to be the same man that he was. And now he's dead. That week is like a blur as I think back on it. Grateful for the pastors and friends and mentors who were there. But yet I got word, Grandma didn't want to keep him out that long. He passed that Tuesday morning, and we were ready to have a funeral that Saturday. I had to rush back home. My friend picked me up in the airport in Augusta, drove me the 3.5 hours to Greensboro to get home because Grandma didn't want to see his body unless I was there. Soon as I got home, she jumped in the car. We went to the funeral home, had to get things together. This was happening within the span of some days. Things were happening so fast. We did a wake, and then we did the funeral on Saturday. And I had to have the responsibility to stand preaching my own grandfather's funeral. And here's the thing. After that funeral, I'm grateful for an amazing church Tabernacle that got on the bus, drove up. Many sang in the choir at my grandfather's homegoing. It was a powerful moment. But that afternoon, after the funeral, I bid my family adieu, got back in the car, drove 3.5, 4 hours back home so I could preach on Sunday morning at Tabernacle. I had an afternoon service. That afternoon, I preached there, and then I kept going about my business. In my mind, I just had to keep moving. I had to keep going. And I will admit to you, if I had to do it over, I would have took some time. I went too fast. I thought I was stronger than I really was. I should have taken some time, some weeks to get over. And I will admit to you, because of that mismanagement, because I did not manage the grief and the pain well, I still feel the reverberations of that hurt every single day. Sometimes it hits me when I'm not even thinking about it. Sometimes it comes in the middle of the night, and I wish I could go back and just deal with the pain. That's what Jesus does in our text. He hears his loved one, his friend, his cousin, spiritual forerunner make the decision, and he got away. And I want to tell you, my brothers and sisters, there's been a lot of loss for us this year. There are people that's listening right now. You've lost loved ones to COVID-19. You lost loved ones to other ailments. You've lost jobs. This has been a year of tremendous loss. And sometimes you got to have to get away in order to grapple with the reality of pain. I'm here to tell you that's what Jesus did. He got away. John's dead. He had to get some time away. But not only do we see that as him learning how to grapple with the reality of pain and gives us that paradigm, but also number two, that sometimes we got to get away because Jesus teaches us we have to reject the need to be needed. This in itself is perhaps one of the hardest things for us to gather. But when you take this text in context, you'll note, how did Jesus get the word? Well, around verses 12 and verses 13, it tells us that the disciples of John got word that John had died. So the text tells us they go and get his body. They then bury his body and then go tell Jesus. Now, this is interesting. These disciples show up to tell Jesus, and I can imagine that in their telling of Jesus what they were wrestling with and what had happened to John, they were perhaps expecting Jesus to provide an answer. I mean, here they are. They know that he's a forerunner. They know in their own hurt, they're going to the one that should be able to heal their hurt. They have an expectation that Jesus is going to do something. But in the text, Jesus does not meet their need. He gets away. In other words, I can imagine that one of the things that's powerful for me is that Jesus was in this text and there was people that needed something, but Jesus did not meet their need, which means more than likely they were disappointed. But their disappointment did not preclude or stop him from getting some time away. Let me help you, because this text has provided revelation in this particular notion, even in my own personal life. You cannot please everybody. And how many of us are in a perpetual cycle of fatigue and hurt because you feel like you got to help everybody, not realizing that you can't help everybody if you haven't first helped yourself. And what Jesus shows us in this text is that there will be times that there will be people who will not have their needs met, and we must release ourselves from the need to be needed. I know some of us feel like we got to be there for everybody. Some of us feel like we got to be there to make sure everything is done correctly. But Jesus in this moment left their concerns on the table and decided to get away. Let me bless you so that you can have some hope and some help this season. I know that you are the one that everybody in the family comes to. I know that you're the confidant for all your friends. I know that people come to you when they're going through, but at some point for your spiritual and mental health, you're going to have to disappoint some people. You're going to have to tell some people, I can't respond right now. I can't meet your need right now, because even though it's important to you, I'm okay releasing myself from being needed by you because I need to take care of me. Jesus got away. And for many of us, that's the challenge, because for every burden that's heavy is not a burden you need to carry. And one of the challenges that all of us face in this season of life is that we struggle because, if we'll be honest, we have an unhealthy addiction to being needed. And so once we seem like we're not needed, many of us assume that we don't have value. But Jesus in our text comes up in this moment when the disciples of John come to him, no doubt with an issue and concern, wanting Jesus to do something about it. Jesus gets away. And this thing blessed me because it lets you and I know that we can't do everything for everybody. And get in the proper perspective of learning how to make sure that I'm operating in humility, I'm operating in grace, but ultimately operating in surrender. At some point, you've got to be okay not meeting everybody's needs. That's what happened as this pastor was challenged to go on a 40-day solitude sabbatical. He did this as a response to a book he was reading, and it was interesting the response that the pastor gave after his 40-day solitude sabbatical. He goes on and said it was perhaps one of the hardest things he had to do. This man of God, who had always put others' needs in front, said that was one of the struggles he wrestled with. But he said the greatest revelation he got out of the 40-day solitude sabbatical was that God spoke to him in the silence to let him know that he was tired because he was fighting the wrong battles. That in essence, the reason why he was so fatigued and could not accomplish the things that should have been made in his life is that he was spending too much time fighting battles that wasn't his to fight. And I want to suggest for each of us that at some point, perhaps, we need to say, God, release me from the addiction of being needed. And if I can release myself from that, it can help me get some time away. Not only do we have to grapple with the reality of the pain, not only do we have to reject the need to be needed, here's the third thing today. We must prioritize the replenishment of our soul. This text, for me, is powerful. And it runs across, as I told you before, Galilee was an overcrowded area. It was teeming with people. But Jesus knew that in order for me to get away, he had to cross the lake to the other side. And even though we see this text happening, we see this moment of solitude being sandwiched between the grief of the death of John to the compassion he has for the people that are hungry. But that can only be accomplished by the fact that even if for a brief moment, he had some time alone. This notion for me is powerful because I think what Jesus gives us the template for is to understand that our soul care should be primary for our lives. A biblical understanding of soul is the entire entity or being of someone. To talk about one's soul is not just the spiritual aspect of ourselves, but our mental, our emotional. In other words, what we see here happening in the passage is that Jesus shows us that our soul has to be prioritized. Jesus understood it. Because for Jesus, Matthew 14 becomes powerful. Because Jesus knew that he got away. Number one, he was human, which means he needed the rest. Number two, he was never reckless, which means he never ran into situations that he did not thoroughly think through. But the third, and perhaps in this text, one of the most important things is that from this moment forward, because of the death of John, the speed of the cross is now inevitable. It is now from this moment that Jesus is ultimately on his way straight to the cross. From Matthew 14 onward, we began to see how Jesus has to withdraw because the inevitability of the cross is at hand. And because of this reality, knowing what's ahead of him, he realizes that if I am to be strong enough to handle what's ahead of me, I've got to spend more time with God than I spend with anybody else. In other words, he says, I'm going to use this moment of solitude and silence and surrender, and I'm not just going to use it just to get away, No, I'm going to use it to reconnect with the one that can strengthen me when I'm weak, can give me joy in my pain, and give me power in my time of seclusion. He literally says that I'm going to use this time to make sure my soul gets what it needs. And let's be honest, for many of us in this season, we've allowed our souls to be weakened. We've allowed our souls to be drained. And the only way you can get it back is not making more spiritual Facebook posts. It's not trying to listen to the latest news cycle. But perhaps the thing we are missing, the thing that's causing us the greatest fatigue is that somehow in all we're going through, we have become disconnected from God. But maybe God is saying, I need you to get some time away so that you can spend all the time with me, because until you feel my flow and feel my spirit, you will never be what you need to be where I'm taking you. So I need you to get away from the hustle and bustle so you can hear my voice. I need you to get away from the negative stuff so you can hear my voice. I need you to cut some stuff off, push away from the table, go to the other side of the lake so that you can know it's me and only me that can provide you what you need. That's what he says. And I know for many of us, we have not yet embraced the reality of the power of solitude. That's what a man by the name of Ferdinand Lesseps found out. It was 1832. He was crossing in a vessel on the Mediterranean. But all of a sudden, a sickness broke out on the boat that caused the whole ship to be quarantined and shut down. Ferdinand was a very active person, so he could not envision his life being shut in a room in a quarantine ship in 1832. He was angry, he was mad, and he felt like he could not stay within the confines of the shut-in. But while he was there, he happened to come across a writing of a man by the name of Le Charles. Le Charles had been contemplating what it would take to create a canal from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. This spoke to the spirit of Ferdinand, because Ferdinand had always considered how can he attribute this help into creating his own canal or channel. And wouldn't it be that 30 years after this moment, in 1862, it is this Ferdinand that helps create what is called the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was a major thoroughfare. It was an incredible thing in that day. But Ferdinand would admit that if it had not been for that 30-year before seclusion and quarantine and shutdown where he got the inspiration he needed, then this 30-year journey to create the Suez Canal would have never been done. In other words, what Ferdinand learned is what you and I should learn, is that God can use moments of solitude and he can use moments of silence. He can use moments to get us away in order to propel us where he wants us to be. That's our text. That Jesus in this moment realizes that if I am to be effective, I must learn that I have got to get some time away. That's my word for you today. I hope and pray that as we consider what this means for us mentally and spiritually and emotionally, not only do we need sleep, but we also need some space. My prayer is for each of us to take seriously in this season, how can I get some time away? Listen, there's never a convenient time to do anything. I too know the challenge. I too am going through a period where I'm trying to figure out when can I get some moments away. But Jesus teaches us it don't have to be far to be far. That what Jesus realized is that journey across the lake where he could go in solitude and in silence was only a trip of 8 miles. As soon as he crossed over this small body of water, he found the solace and solitude that he needed. What I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be a place that requires a passport to be a place for you to get away to. That there are places within proximity of where you are that you can say, this will be the place that I get away to. I don't know what that looks like for you. Maybe it's checking yourself in to a neighboring town and to a hotel that's following COVID-19 restrictions, but you can at least get a day or two in and just get away. Maybe it's a moment where you call up friends or whatever and say, listen, I need some space. Can you provide me this refuge? Can you take the kids, or can you do this? Whatever it may be for your mental, spiritual, and emotional health, get some time away. Or maybe it could be even within the own confines of your home, but you say, listen, I'm going to create an experience that makes me feel like I'm away. Now that may be hard. I know the difficulty now, especially with everything being home. But what I am saying is sometimes what you can't do physically, you ought to still be able to try to do mentally. What can I do to get away? How can I create this moment? Because I don't know about you, if we don't deal with it now, there will come a time where it can't get the best of us. Listen, I'm praying for you. I'm asking God's grace upon you. Father, I ask that you allow us the capacity, the opportunity. Give us those who hold us accountable to make sure we have a mental break. God, it's been a lot. We've been overwhelmed. We've dealt with so much. And we admit, God, that it oftentimes feels as if there is no help coming, no end in sight. But God, we thank you that Jesus gives us the perfect model to let us know that at our most